The meeting will begin in 30 seconds. The meeting will begin in 30 seconds.
It's 5:35. I'm going to call the Fiscal Committee meeting to order. Before we get into any of the action, I also want to let you know we are not going to go over an hour. We will adjourn at 6:35 wherever we're at, just so the clerks can prepare for the 7 o'clock and give the council a short break before the 7 p.m. meeting. First item, I need a motion to approve the minutes from Friday, February 25th.
So moved, Aguilar.
Second, Rolfing.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor of approving the minutes of February 25th, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those are approved. We're going to reverse the order under reports and updates. The budget analyst position report is not going to take long, so I'm going to have Sue take care of that, please.
And I would ask Councillor Rolfing or Jameson or Erpenbach to add whatever they would like to this report. A subcommittee was appointed by our chair, Councillor Brown, of myself, Councillors Rolfing and Erpenbach. We did meet on March 10th. We reviewed the job description that had been prepared. We made 2 changes to that job description. Under the description itself, item number 5, there was the change from and keep city clerk, chief of council operations apprised of current trends and developments to and reports to city council about current trends and developments. And then under item 9, performs other such duties and functions as outlined for this position in the departmental position result description and performance standard to perform other such duties and functions as are outlined for this position as directed by the city clerk, chief of council operations, and city council. I was then asked to, at our leadership meeting on Thursday, to report to Director O'Toole and the mayor that we were moving forward. Director O'Toole had a prior commitment with a civil service hearing, and we decided we wouldn't pull him out of that for this. And so we did also, when I set up the meeting with the mayor, he had requested that we inform Director Turback, being new, on what the intent of the council was in approving this position for the 2011 budget, and Councilors Brown, Jameson, and myself did meet with Director Turback on Wednesday, and then on last Thursday we informed the mayor and the city attorney that we were moving forward with the position. The mayor did assure us that we would have HR support and that he would be looking for, in the administration, for an unused FTE that we can utilize for the position.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Aguilar. Are there questions for Councilor Aguilar? All right. Well, let's move to agenda item 3A, discussion of the authorization of the city contracts. We have a working draft in order here, and Deborah Owen is going to walk us through that. Deborah.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Fiscal Committee. Deborah Owen, City Clerk, Chief of Council Operations. If we could just kind of recap where we've come and where we've been in terms of this. As you know, the City Charter does not express, or not actually address, the authorization of contracts by the governing body in general terms. However, we did find a provision today that I'll bring up a little bit later that does talk about that. But however, state law does address the authorization of contracts by the governing body As you know, the statute creates a general rule that the governing body must authorize a municipal contract to be valid, but also creates an exception to the rule, which allows the governing body to delegate the authorization of contracts to an employee of the city. And again, that was in our minutes and in notes prior. And then we had kind of a working draft at the time. Well, maybe it will show up, maybe it won't. Which really just exempted, or had contracts approved entirely by council, and that's what we had been working up to this point. In late February, the committee met and then took input from internal audit about their recommendations for the approval of contracts, along with council input. And so, from that discussion, then we've moved forward with this working draft. I think once it would be, the concepts are finalized, it would probably be revised to be written differently, would be my recommendation. Then anyway, and so it starts in section 34.5, which was the section that the council were considering and revising initially. But and there's some sections that are added as we realize that in the body of this there are some other contracts that council would authorize in terms of ordinance. So it says, in addition to the provisions in City Charter Section 212, and that's where the council authorizes cable franchise contracts and such, and then 211C, and that is, oh, look, the dot cam's working. That's the provision that we kind of found today. We were looking for the number of votes it took to appoint a council member. And now it's on the overhead, and that is any action calling for the expenditure of money in excess of state bid limits for municipalities requires a vote of 5 council members. And so, again, we found this not really looking for it. We're looking for something else. But I think this may change how the council moves forward, but making no recommendations at this point in time. Anyway, we just added that in there, but we may need to take out some other portions in here down the road. And then 34.511, which has to do with your council approving public facilities or management contracts for public facilities. And then 34.5(1-2), which has to do with contracts that are for longer than 1 year, or renewals of contract that are for longer than a year. And then it says contracts, agreements, and amendments to contracts and agreements in excess of $20,000 per vendor for each calendar year shall be approved by the City Council, except for contracts subject to the City Ordinances Section 34.5-8 and 34.5-11. And those two provisions have to do with the emergency procurement contracts when the mayor declares a state of emergency and needs to fix things immediately. And so that's one of those sections in ordinance. And the other one is the state law, that price list, where it's a standard amount that's given to the state, and the city also buys off of that list as well. Things like sometimes computers, but I know office furniture and maybe vehicles, and vehicles too. And so we wanted to incorporate that in the exemption. And then the section here was in part recommendation from internal audit. However, given the overhead projector and that clause on there, I'm not sure we'll move forward with this down the road. But it states, and contracts for any public improvement that involves the expenditure of $50,000 or more, and contracts for the purchase of supplies and services other than professional services that involves the expenditure of $25,000 or more. And those, that $50,000 and that $25,000, those are the state law bid limits for the specific like public works and or goods and services. And that's why that is in there. Each contract or agreement of the city shall be executed in the name of the municipality by the mayor or his or her designee, and shall be attested by the city clerk. The city clerk shall affix the corporate seal. Any contract or agreement for park purposes shall be reviewed by the Parks and Recreation Board prior to council consideration. Contracts in excess of $20,000 that are entered into by the mayor and are not subject to council approval shall be noticed to the city council on the consent agenda under communications. Change orders to contracts shall be noticed to city council on the consent agenda under communications. Those recommendations come from internal audit. They're in the minutes from the last council or fiscal committee meeting. In addition, there's a section, all contracts of the city shall contain a provision that contracts shall not, in the performance of the contract, discriminate or permit discrimination in violation of federal or state laws or local ordinances because of race, color, sex, age, political and religious opinions, affiliations, or national origin. And then on to the contracts involving public facilities. This section was really requested by council through a number of fiscal committees, and it reads this way. No contract pertaining to the management of the city's public facilities will be valid unless the contract has been authorized by a vote of the city council at a duly assembled meeting. Contracts for public facilities shall be listed on the regular agenda for separate consideration. Prior to contract negotiations, the city council will be given notice by the administration in writing. And then we have section 34.5, 1-2, the approval of contracts for longer than a year. I sometimes wonder if this section should be in charter and not an ordinance, but it says, in addition to provisions in city charter section 2.12, all contracts involving the payment of money from appropriations of more than one fiscal year of the city shall be approved by ordinance. No contract involving the payment of money from appropriations of more than one fiscal year of the city shall be made for a period of more than 5 years with an option to renew or renegotiate for subsequent up to 5-year periods, subject to the approval of the council in office at the time of said option or renegotiations is put into effect. Nor shall such contract, option, or renegotiation be valid unless approved by ordinance. The original, this was in part borrowed from, I think it's the Tulsa, Oklahoma ordinances. It had said 10 years, but internal audit recommended that would be 5 years and not 10. Otherwise, if it was 10, they recommended up to 1 10-year renewal. The next section is interesting, and that has the budget administration manuals required. This, in part, wasn't talked about so much at fiscal committee, but it has been talked about by council on numerous times. There's a provision in charter under the Article 5 where it has the council is to set up pardon me, looking for the words, how the budget is administered. And yet this ordinance says the mayor shall develop that. So it seemed like there was a conflict between what council had talked about prior, last October, I think. And so I simply added, subject to the council approval, the mayor shall develop, promulgate, and update a manual or manuals containing procedures for administering the budget, including but not limited to the following: budgeting, purchasing, and accounting. As you know, records retention is managed by the clerk's office, but that's already been approved by council by resolution. And then for the emergency award contract without advertising, we simply added his or her designee, and then a recommendation of internal audit with that the council would be provided the information after that contract has been awarded. So we just added that section on there. The rest of it is just adding his or her designee. So the heart, if you will, or the majority of this is really in those first few sections. And just to summarize, and I still think we need to resolve this charter provision about the expenditure of money in excess of state bid limits. That would be that $25,000 and that $50,000 purchases by the city. And that will resolve, I'm guessing, down the road. But essentially that all contracts in excess of $20,000, with a few exceptions, would be approved by council. And the council would approve all of the the management of all of our public buildings. Those contracts would be on the regular agenda and approved by council. In addition, when there are contracts entered into over $20,000, council would be given notice after the contract was awarded and signed by the mayor under the consent agenda communications. Any questions?
Questions from the committee for Deborah? Councilor Rolfing.
Yeah, Deborah, just very quickly explain let's see, you've got the 50 and 25 on the bids. And then the 20,000 is, explain that again?
Well, there are different contracts. You know, especially there's like consultant contracts.
Okay.
Consultant contracts, some things are exempt from state bid laws,
That's
even if
right.
they're 25,000 or
Okay.
50,000. And
So anything under 20 would not have to be, and everything over 20 for consultants and different things like that, right? Okay.
Yeah, ones that
Just
weren't
had to
subject to
refresh
bid
my
laws.
memory.
And we were the committee was looking for a threshold instead of having every one of them come forward, but some sort of threshold. But there was some concerns about having the administration getting their contracts through within 30 days of their bid, to award the bid within 30 days of the bid opening. And so that's why the ordinance was originally drafted, or is drafted, with the exception of those state law bid contracts. But in lieu of this, it's clear that it takes a vote of 5 council members to approve those expenditures in excess of the state bid limits for municipalities. And so I think that's something that we should probably review and talk about and come back to what the council wants to do.
Councilor Jameson.
Are you saying we haven't been following the, is that what I'm hearing? You're not, we just haven't been following it and now we need to fix it so we do follow it, or is?
Well, in deference to those sitting behind me, no, there is an ordinance that's in conflict with this. The ordinance that the council is looking to revise right now has all of the administration clearing all of the contracts for the city. It is something to pause about, because here you clearly say there's the inference that you'll be voting on all of those contracts and that you'll be doing it and approving those with a 5-member vote of the council. I mean, if you go on to read it, you know, it says, or we looked at it for the filling of vacancies as set forth in Section 2.06 of this provision, because that's what we needed to have, those 5 council member votes tonight for the new Northwest District council member. But then it goes on to say, shall be valid or binding unless adopted by the affirmative vote. And so it's just interesting. So,
Other questions from the committee? Do any of the councilors in the audience have any questions or comments? If not, I'll open it up to the floor if there are questions or comments from anyone else in the audience. Mayor Huther.
Thank you for the opportunity, Committee Chair Brown. I do appreciate it. I guess my only comment is that we were trying to open up some dialogue. I think Councilor Brown, at least you and I were, in terms of trying to find the most productive way to handle a topic like this. In the spirit of trying to do a couple things. Number one, try to be as transparent as we could to the people of Sioux Falls so that they could understand what these contracts were all about, what the expenses were, who was receiving the work, and we thought that was a good thing to do. Secondly, I think that we wanted to also try to involve the council in those contracts that were indeed the most appropriate. The ones that we talked about, Councilor Brown, were those high-dollar contracts, as well as those involving public venues or venues that were owned or operated by the city of Sioux Falls. There's some history there, as we've talked about, where there probably wasn't that open dialogue as much as needed to be, and so we wanted to take care of that. At the same time, I think, Councilor Brown, we talked about the need also to do the people's work, to do something in a productive fashion as well. Even though we've talked about the speed of government and comparing that to other entities, we also know that checks and balances are indeed a good thing, and that speed isn't always a good thing. We wanted to find that balance. I thought we were on the right track in terms of that dialogue that we were having. One of the things that we chatted about, I think it was less than 30 days ago or right around that time, was we wanted to evaluate all the contracts that we had signed just in the month of March alone. And then we would go through those, to learn all kinds of things. Number one, what are the volumes? What are the dollar amounts? What were they utilized for? And we were hoping that maybe after we reviewed that, then maybe we could come back and put together some good legislation for the council to decide on. I guess today I was caught a little bit off guard. I thought we were on that right track, and then today I saw that the legislation, even though it's draft legislation, and you made that very, very clear, I was a bit confused by it. I thought that the right thing to do would be to let's analyze all these things and then put together the right legislation so that we wouldn't have to make a number of revisions to it. I still think that we can find that common ground. I still think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we do the people's work, do the government's work, and find that right legislation. And Councilor Brown, you have my word that I'm still hoping to work with you and all of the fiscal committee as well as the city councilors to find that common ground. In reviewing this document today and reviewing what Deborah Owen has presented, I personally don't think that's the common ground at all. But again, only you folks can ultimately decide that. And I would just urge us to let's just go back and do it what I think would be the right way versus the fast way. But only you will decide that. Councilor Brown, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Questions for Mayor Huther? Councilor Jamison.
Mayor, you're right that we were trying to quantify the amount of contracts that the administration handles in a month, and I know we're in the early days of April. When do you expect that you would have that data completed for us?
Well, I think Scott Rust was working with not only Councilor Brown and myself and David Fifley and some others. They were putting all that together. Not only what did we do in the month of March, but they also wanted to go back and analyze as much data as we possibly can. I personally can't answer that, but I know that they were diligently working on it, and I think that whether it's Mr. Rust or Tracy Turback or Mr. Fifley, I know that they were working on that, so I guess I'll defer to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Mayor Huther?
Oh, sure.
I apologize, Councilor Brown.
Councilor Rolfing.
I just want to say that you're right. I completely forgot that we were waiting for those statistics, and so we will wait. I think until at least that's the way I feel. What we need to do at this point.
And again, Councilor Brown, to be fair to him,
yeah,
he has mentioned that this is draft legislation.
Right.
I always get very, very fearful though when I see draft legislation that looks like it's well on its way, and as Councilor Aguilar has mentioned, the ship has sailed. I'm getting the impression that the ship has sailed and there's no turning back. And I'll tell you, working with Councilor Brown, I thought that we were on the same wavelength, and after today, I don't know.
The direction from the last fiscal committee meeting was that a draft be presented at this meeting.
Okay.
So I apologize if I didn't communicate that to you, but that was the direction given to staff. So
that's fair. That's very fair. Thank you.
Scott.
Thank you, Councilor. Scott Rust, City Finance Office. What you have in front of you today is the number of contracts that the city has awarded and number of agreements that the city has awarded in either finance or the engineering office. As you can see, the year usually starts off a little slow. It's not like you just turn the faucet on and you start awarding contracts. Obviously, the bid process takes a little bit of time, a few months. As a whole, the city in January, February, and March, all contracts and agreements, a total of 194 contracts and agreements have been let and awarded. We expect that number to increase in April. We are trending we're trending up for the month of April, probably even May too. So, that number we gave you guys earlier this year regarding the number of contracts that the city executes in a year, we're trending towards that right now. A couple hundred a quarter, with I think the second quarter to probably even be higher than the first. and it usually is. Our big months are March, April, May, June, as far as letting a lot of the construction and equipment related and goods and services contracts.
Or Scott. Councilor Jameson.
Scott, do you have any dollar amounts that you can?
Yeah, we're vetting through that information right now. We just tied everything up as of last Friday. I was working on it today. It's not completely done, but I will be sending out a spreadsheet to the fiscal committee. That way, you'll be able to see the dollar amounts of a lot of these contracts, agreements. I don't have the change orders on this sheet here, but I do have change orders and contract addendums also that we also did track. That information will be coming on this spreadsheet along with this summary. But we wanted to vet through that information, make sure we got everything right before we send it off to you. As far as Mayor Huther asked me what percentage were above the threshold, and I would probably say off the cuff, 60 to 70% of those were over that threshold.
Will you include that in your report, though, as well?
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the things we got to vet through. We just ran out of time today. We've been working on it since last week. So,
Scott, I would also ask that you not only send it to the fiscal committee, but to the entire council, because
Sure.
this is of keen interest, I think, to the full council. I don't want to make them have a tighter deadline if they have questions. So,
yeah. Okay.
other questions for Scott? Councilor Jameson?
Well, I was going to just ask on the delay process. How are you and the purchasing and your end of it as far as if the council had to get involved in some of these decisions? How do you feel that would affect your office and the city's ability to go quickly?
It's going to be tough for us to try and award within that 30 days. State law does define the 30-day threshold as far as trying to get contracts awarded. By the time, even with the new technology we have coming in place and having, the legislation over to the council by 10 a.m. on Monday, and then having it approved 20 days later, you're right at the 30 days are not over. And you're relying on contractors to get this stuff signed right away and get it back to you almost same day. They're busy people. That doesn't quite happen. There's times where we see a week to 10 days before we see those documents back. I send them out daily. I very rarely see them signed and returned within a day or two. It does tie our hands a little bit.
Did you have? Okay. How does it work in other cities? Clearly, they
Well,
make it work.
I did some research, and you asked that question last time, and I knew you'd probably ask that today. And I did contact Jeff Holden out at the state of South Dakota today. We talked, but I also did some research from what other states are doing. Rather than contacting those other cities, their procurement policies drive on state law also. The state of Iowa, they give 30 days from the notice of intent of award. So they have a provision in their law where they can give the intent of award, and then 30 days after that letter is dated of that intent, the contract has to be fully executed. The state of North Dakota does not specify a time limit for execution of contract. State of Minnesota it just says reasonable amount of time. And Nebraska also lists a reasonable amount of time. Model procurement code states that a reasonable amount of time should be the standard in most state laws. In talking with Jeff Holden today, the state wouldn't be opposed of changing our own law. They would fully support it. But there again, the state has to award their contracts within 30 days. And they get it done, but their contracts are signed by the procurement director right at that point. So obviously they don't have the hoops to jump through, or I should say they've got checks and balances. We have a lot of checks and balances, maybe more so than the state does.
Thanks for anticipating my question. All right. Thank you, Scott.
You bet. Thank you.
Any other questions or any other speakers from the audience? Deborah?
Thank you. Just to follow up, in deference to Scott, he did get the council the numbers in January, and it's in the minutes from the February meeting. I don't know if you can read it, but you do have some of those numbers in total for 2008, 2009, and 2010, and the draft is pretty dark, but you can kind of see it's 913, 60, and 12, I think. But anyway, in deference to the finance, they did actually get us some of those numbers earlier on, and it is in the minutes.
That reminds me, Scott, I do have another question, if I may. Remind us the difference between agreements and contracts.
The contract is set up for, we obviously use contracts for construction and equipment. Agreements are usually used for services such as professional services or, say, janitorial services. They outline and detail what needs to be done.
Very good. Any other comments? We are not taking a vote on this today. This is just for consideration, and we will watch for your further information and then decide where to go from there in our May Fiscal Committee meeting. Are there any items for open discussion? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I just have one if I could.
Councilor Jamison, yes.
I know a couple weeks ago or so we talked about a report that the administration is working on, I believe, for the amount of money that's coming in from the federal government or from the state or grants and that such. Do we know when how that's coming and when that might be here? It'd be nice if we... Tracy?
Good afternoon. Tracy Turback, Finance. I'll try to address that. Matter of fact, we discussed it at our directors meeting this morning. That is in progress. I believe we're waiting on a couple of the departments to submit their updated information, but just as soon as we get that compiled, we will certainly share that with the entire council. So it's certainly an issue of concern of those departments, particularly that rely quite heavily on federal funding, and we have several of those. So I hope that answers your question.
Right. I just wanted to bring it up as much as we could that we, with the way things are going nationally, we should be considering our options and planning for those potential changes that could come our way. And Sioux Falls has got a lot of great things already in place. That would be a major hit for us that we would should be prepared for, and at least have thought about it, and it sounds like the administration is doing that, and I think that's great. I just wanted to make sure that we as well press along and think about our planning for the future as well. Thank you.
Any other items for open discussion? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, we are adjourned at 6:06.
Boy, there's a